Marius Gustavson set up a pay-per-view website named the Eunuch Maker, and it featured the most horrific and extreme body modifications. He himself had procedures carried out, and he encouraged others to do the same. In fact, he manipulated his victims into agreeing to have life-changing procedures carried out by non-qualified individuals in far from sterile environments. This is the astonishing and grotesque case of the Unik Maker. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me. All I can say about today's case is, wow, just wow. When you think things can't get any weirder in life, you come across a case like this. Now, I'm interested in this case both from a psychological and personal level. Personally, it interests me to see people do these extreme things for money, and psychologically, it interests me from a therapeutic framework and mindset. I'll talk a bit about that during this actual video and why it relates to this case in particular, although there's always a lot of debate, isn't there? People have different perceptions about particular classifications psychologically and psychiatrically, and I imagine some of you will come to different conclusions than I do in this video, which you can let me know about in the comments. Before I kick off, I am wearing my Don't Fuck With Cats top because I love it. It features my own cat, Chase. You want more Chase merch? It's coming. Believe me. It's coming. Also, if you want to pre-order my book, The Serial Killer Next Door, which will be available from September the 5th in all good bookstores and, of course, on Amazon. But if you want to get one of them first, you just need to register below and pre-order at one of the places that will be stocking it. So if that's something you fancy, please go ahead and order it. I appreciate each and every one of you, and it's awesome that you encouraged me to write a book, and it's even more awesome that I got a deal. Thank you very much. Let's kick off with today's absolutely shocking case. Let's talk about Marius Theodore Gustavson. So he's 46 at the time that he is sentenced. He was originally from Norway, and he's the person who basically heads the pay-per-view business. He's originally from a very small town to the southwest of Oslo. He previously worked as a postman in Norway. He was also an individual who was active in the LGBT world. He was the chair of an LGBT charity, which was known for organising Pride Weekend, as well as traditional Rus celebrations. So there are a series of events and parties that basically happen for high school students before the final exams. If you don't know about the Rus celebrations, it's really well worth having a quick look up. If you imagine spring break in America, it seems to be a little bit more extreme than that. But this guy is clearly involved in communities, and to some degree, that's something that we're going to be talking about today, even though we're talking about a very different kind of community than the ones I've just highlighted there. But there is obviously something about his psychology that makes him want to be involved in organising things. It's just, unfortunately, he takes that organisation trait within him to a very extreme and very disastrous level, both for himself and for all those who seem to have some kind of connection and relationship with him. Now, he's obviously got issues in his nature, because in 1999, he receives a suspended prison sentence for fraud. So he committed fraud against a housing cooperative. And then in 2001, he's sentenced to 8 months for internet fraud. So there is a level of con artistry within his mindset, within his nature, that goes without saying. But things change ultimately in 2005. He marries his husband, and it feels as if that stability, that sense of structure and foundation, it really makes him a better person. He's stable for a long period of time in that relationship. He then moves with his husband to North London, to the borough of Haringey, in 2012. But sadly, his marriage ends after 11 years in 2016. And I would say this is really the trigger. I obviously have highlighted that there are things within Gustavson's nature which are criminal. We've talked about the fact that he has been in trouble before because of his actions. But like I said, the structure and foundation of his marriage seems to temper that kind of behaviour, and it gives him a foundation that means he operates in a legal manner. When that marriage disintegrates, he really struggles with it. And it feels that this trauma, the ending of this relationship, really activates that nature that we've talked about already, but also it exacerbates the problems, the fractures within who he is as a human being, because this is when Gustavson starts to modify himself. And when we use the word modify, we're not talking about having a nose piercing, or maybe going a little bit OTT with the ear piercings like I did when I was a young person, or having a few tattoos like I did, or having my belly button pierced and all those bits and bobs. You know, modification can be quite fashionable, can't it? But we're talking about modification in a whole different universe. The universe that Gustavson clearly decides is a universe that he not only wants to inhabit, but he wants to bring others to as well. He likes that community part of himself, and he thinks, you know what? I like the old modification of my body. Let's get some other people who might want to be modified as well. And you know what? There are quite a few people queuing up, bizarrely, which we'll explore a little bit more in detail as I move through this. Now, in December 2016, when that relationship has broken down, pretty immediately, the modification that he engages in is really enormous. So the shift is massive. Gustavson has his penis removed. I kid you not. So he actually has his penis removed by Damien Burns, a male sex worker from Tottenham. And this guy basically says, yeah, I will mutilate you. I will remove said penis without any training or qualifications. I will do that for £500. That's what he agrees to. He knows it's going to be filmed, so he's completely on board with going ahead and literally removing somebody's penis. Now, before the procedure, he actually said to Gustavson, I have no issue with this, but won't you lose a lot of blood, like nearly die? And the answer is yes, that's exactly what would happen. So throwing it out there, don't do it. You know, it's a very simple equation to this, isn't it? A, I've got a penis. B, remove my penis with no medical training in a non-sanitary environment. C, probably gonna die. So at that point, you're like, this is serious. I understand what I'm doing and the ramifications of that potential action, but he just goes ahead. And Gustavson says to this particular individual that he would be anaesthetized at the time, he'd be tied down, and he instructs Burns about how to do it. And so he does it. He actually carries out that procedure, and on the video, you hear him say, well, that's one off the bucket list. I never expected that one. Why is it on your bucket list? Just going to throw it out there. I'm imagining for the mere mortals watching this video, we're all thinking, well, we all have bucket lists. I mean, for example, I had a parachute jump. I've ticked that one off. I've got travel. I hopefully will at some point tick that one off. I want to live with 38 dogs and 703 cats. I'll get to a point where I'll probably tick that one off as well. But I've never thought, probably want to amputate one of my organs. You know, it's never been one that I've really thought about having. And I've certainly never thought, well, I'll go one stage further. I feel like I'd like to amputate somebody else's organs. That bucket kind of list is one that very few of us, I imagine, would ever conceive of having or making. But apparently it was on his, and now, nice one, he's ticked that goal off. Now, following the procedure, Burns leaves, and at this point, Gustavson calls 999 and says, quote, I tried to do some surgery, a little bit more than circumcision. Now, I don't know about you, but the very fact that he's doing a call with a sarcastic tone, that says something really dark to me. If you're on the phone to 999, one, you're wasting their resources because there are people who actually deserve to be treated. There are people who might not get the ambulance because you're going to be considered a more important case, and then something terrible and tragic happens to that person who deserved the NHS to be there for them. But of course, when somebody is saying, I tried to do some surgery a little bit more than circumcision, he's doing it in a sarcastic tone, but he's indicating something very serious. So they're clearly going to be sending an ambulance straight away. He's taken into hospital. He was discharged after a few days, and there was a referral within that for a psychiatric assessment, which makes sense. I am not sure that somebody who turns up at hospital having had their penis removed of their own volition should be allowed to leave after a few days. I'm just going to throw it out there, no matter what their capacity seems, because that's the benchmark in the UK. Does the person have capacity? i.e., do they know what they're doing? Are they a danger to themselves or anybody else? I would argue that he should be at least voluntarily sectioned for a period of time, because he's cut his penis off on a voluntary level, and even though it shows capacity that he understands what he's done, is he a danger to himself? Yeah, probably a danger to himself. Going to throw it out there. Probably a danger to himself, but hey, let's just let him go after a few days and let him recognise that he can go and have a psychiatric assessment if he turns up for the appointment, essentially. Now, one of the issues with this home surgery is that Burns doesn't actually receive his payment. So he's like, you know what I'm going to do, Gustavson? Because you didn't pay me, I'm going to go to the police. And Gustavson's like, yeah, off you pop. Good idea. It's going to work out well for you. Because what Gustavson knows is that if you go to the police with that, you're going to be in trouble. First of all, he says that Burns has been threatening him. Then he says that he's now blackmailed him, give me the money or else. And also, hey, where's my penis? He mutilated him. So Burns backs off because he understands that he can't do that. And also, with respect, he doesn't cease the relationship with Gustavson. And I imagine that's because Gustavson's really reframed the situation for Burns. And he's probably thinking to himself, well, this guy's got me on video doing this. I could be in serious trouble. So over the next 2 years, Gustavson pays Burns sums totaling more than £1,500. And I think that even though Burns may well be a willing participant in this, he probably feels that Gustavson's got a real hold over him because he's done something so highly illegal. And it is highly illegal. In the UK, we had a case of R versus Brown, and basically this is where the state essentially decided that even if you're consenting to harm yourself, you can't do that at a certain point. There has got to be a boundary of what is acceptable harm and what is unacceptable harm, which is a weird ruling to make anyway, but I get it. So essentially a group of gay men were sadistically harming one another, but they were all consenting to it. They all enjoyed it. It was like an extreme form of BDSM. They were taking videos of themselves and then they were basically allowing those videos to be seen by other people, one of which was a police officer, so that didn't work out very well. And they were all prosecuted in spite of the fact that they all consented to the action. And the mindset of the courts is to say, you may wish to consent, but if that consent can lead to something that is grossly problematic for your body, that's grievous in nature, that could indeed cause death, we have to rule that that is still an offence, even if it is to the self. And so that ruling happened. In the UK, you cannot consent to serious harm. And the reason as well that they do that is because if you don't have a boundary, then people can do anything. They can say, well, I wanted this person to murder me. I've written this information, done a video saying that's what I want to happen. And also I want them to cannibalise me. And if it was all about, well, you can consent to that, people would be able to do it and get away with basic murder. So there are boundaries and rules put in place. So this guy who's carrying out this mutilation will likely know that there'll be serious consequences for him if the authorities find out, which there will be, and there are. Probably should have just thought about backing off initially and accepting that 500 quid was all he was going to take, because the fact that he's returning means that now he's part of that situation and the situation is going to get even more extreme. Now the website, which is where they start to earn a revenue, the Eunuch Maker website, it was literally active for 4 years. So it was active between 2017 and 2021. Gustavson gave himself that title, the Unik Maker. And as a user, if you found this website, you could subscribe to it, you could buy individual videos, and what it offered as a website was a bit of membership opportunity. So you could have basic, premium, and VIP memberships. Very important person memberships. Apparently, people like that kind of acclaim and clearly thought that this was the kind of VIP they wanted to associate themselves as. And it was for up to £100 a year, which is mind-blowing. That anybody would be like, when I've got that £100, that spare amount of money, I could put it on a dating site, I could get involved in a hobby, I don't know, I could donate it to charity, or I could go on a body modification website where I can watch people have penises cut off. I think I'm going to go for that. But this is what it cost, £100. And there were 22,841 paying subscribers from across the globe. There was no shortage of people literally queuing up to watch this kind of body modification. Now, bear in mind, we expect this kind of horror to unfold on the dark web and the very deep dark web. Those things exist. They believe that it accounts for a huge amount of individuals who are just looking in places that no one should ever look. But that's not where the Eunuch Maker website was. It was just on good old Google, etc. You could just pop in, bit of body modification, and you'd find it. It was there in front of the whole world to see. Now, during the time that the website was active, it made 300 grand, 300,000 pounds. And the website basically featured clips of castrations, penis removal, the freezing of limbs, as well as streaming of the actual procedures happening. So you literally could tune in and watch somebody having a part of their body removed. I mean, if you're doing that in your spare time, get a better hobby. That would be my suggestion, as well as a considerable amount of therapy, because genuinely that kind of viewing, it makes you a wrong 'un. It's as simple as that. Now, Gustavson, he himself had procedures performed on him, so he had his penis removed. But then in 2019, his boyfriend, a guy called Jacob Creamy Appleby, he was only 23, he came from Epsom in Surrey, he basically gets involved as well. So I would say this Creamy Appleby just goes down the rabbit hole online and starts to, as a young person, connect with these very odd sites, but he's young. And I would say the rabbit hole, very much, he was dragged down and seduced to some degree by the older Gustavson, because he actually started communicating with Gustavson when he was 17 years of age. So he's very young when this relationship begins. And I would say there is definitely an element of grooming where Creamy Appleby is concerned. So they start messaging one another in September 2018, as I said, when Creamy Appleby is 17. They later engage in a sexual relationship. And we can imagine that a 17-year-old young gay man is on a journey of discovery. They've probably dealt with some sexuality issues, some challenges, even some trauma sometimes that's associated with having to come to terms with the fact that people around you may have levels accepting you. I know we all say we live in this really accepting society, and we do in the Western world for the most part. But it's challenging to acknowledge who you are as a young person if you don't fit the typical idea and ideal of how somebody is meant to be as a man in particular. And I think that understandably, when you have an older gay man who is coaxing, encouraging, helping you initially and allowing you to come to terms with who you are as a human being and to accept yourself fully without feeling the need to apologise in any way, that will be probably quite alluring, and you'll feel like you relate and they know more and therefore you follow them. But what is happening here is Gustavson is then getting him involved in this really dark arena, this subgroup of belonging that is very bad for Creamy Appleby. If you hadn't met him, I do not believe for a second he would have ended up where he ends up. Now, in messages between the pair, Gustavson boasts about the procedures he's carried out on others and said he actually personally kept his testicles that he removed in jars. And Creamy Appleby responds, awesome, which is quite childish, isn't it? But then a young person is going to be that way. And it's an odd situation. They're talking to somebody, they probably feel quite impressed by them. They've gone down this weird rabbit hole of looking at body modification, whilst probably dealing with a lot of conflicts personally. And then you've got this older guy who seems super confident and super interested in you. You're not going to be like, well, that's weird. Why have you done that? I'm just going to call 999. You probably would do if you were 30, but you're a young person. So awesome is the response. And their relationship gets to a point where in January of 2019, they're basically discussing the amputation of Gustavson's leg. I kid you not. He's like, I've got rid of the penis and now I want to get rid of my leg as well. And he's getting encouraged, I would say, by Creamy Appleby, who's saying that he's going to look amazing without a leg, which again, if you consider the fact that so many people who live with disabilities struggle because of the issues that they face when they lose a leg or when they're born with deformities, the idea that these individuals are genuinely encouraging one another to remove a perfectly healthy organ or a perfectly healthy limb, it is distressing. Now, Creamy Appleby is so invested by this point that he genuinely helps to freeze Gustavson's leg in dry ice in February 2019. That meant that yet again, the NHS had to come, collect him, and then because they hadn't done an effective job of amputating his leg, they had to go ahead and do it properly. When he'd put it in dry ice for hours, obviously there was no coming back. His leg was completely useless at this point. He's now disabled himself, but basically they needed to do the job properly. So he's cost the taxpayer even more. And now he's cost the NHS all this extra money. People like me who have to pay taxes, he's gone ahead and done that. He then goes and claims £18,500 in disability benefits. And I get it. I get the fact that people deserve disability benefits. Of course they do. But if you have chosen to do this to yourself, then I genuinely don't think you should be able to have any disability benefits. He had a perfectly healthy limb and he removed it on purpose. And also bear in mind, he's benefiting financially because he's actually got this pay-per-view website where thousands of people are paying to witness these kind of things happening. So he's not short of a bob or two, essentially. He then goes on and has a nipple removed by a guy called Nathan Arnold. He was a 48-year-old nurse from South Kensington. That happened in the summer of 2019. It is pretty shocking, though, that an actual nurse would go ahead and do this, because even though it's just a nipple, and I appreciate that is in a whole different ballpark than what we're discussing when we're talking about legs or when we're talking about penises. Clearly there isn't going to be a grave issue in doing that, but nonetheless, he's a nurse and he understands that part of what nurses and doctors do is to not do any harm. You're there to do good. And again, it just tells you that there are people from different walks of life who are very interested in this particular body modification area. And Gustavson didn't just have things done to him, he was very much the controller. He carried out at least 29 of the vile procedures himself. And obviously there'll have been more, but they have evidence for this, video evidence. They know that those procedures occurred because he was filming it, he was streaming it, he was having people pay for these things. So we know that at least that many operations, and I use the term operations very loosely here, but we know that they took place. I would imagine there were many, many, many more. And all of these, as far as I'm concerned, and certainly from the research I've read, they were carried out on men who'd basically been pressured and manipulated into having their bodies mangled. They weren't always happy participants. In fact, they were promised money. They were told, listen, there's revenue coming from the videos, we're going to pay you. And if you're struggling financially and you maybe have a vague interest in this and you're having a lot of people reinforcing this is what you should do and you're getting a lot of validation for that, that can put you into some very challenging situations. Add to that drugs, because I guarantee they were using drugs that would have put those people into situations where they were making decisions when their ambitions were lowered. And that means that they were coerced and at times made to feel like there was no other opportunity but to go ahead and do it. And a boy as young as 16 years of age had the genitals electrocuted by Gustavson. 16. I mean, that's a child. I appreciate that at 16, you're allowed to have sex in the UK. At 16, you can obviously consent to certain things as having your ears pierced, etc. But when it comes down to 16-year-olds, they're literally either at school or just left school. They're kids. And he's electrocuting genitals and he's live streaming this information. That is just child abuse as far as I'm concerned. And many of the men that he did the procedures on, they actually went for their penises being removed. Now, I will tell you, I have looked at this particular practice. I've even done interviews on the arena of nullos. So this is basically, I would say, a subculture that is growing. It has always existed. There have always been men who have wanted to completely eradicate their genitals. In fact, these days, there are also women who want to do the same. Obviously, that involves surgery where you make this really smooth area down below. So as opposed to having the genitals that somebody like myself would have or a man would have, we're talking about literally smoothing it all out. So the look is almost androgynous. And bizarrely, there are some cosmetic procedures that actually go ahead and do this. It's not something that's legal in the UK, but it certainly does happen elsewhere. Believe me, have a Google of it if you want to. But this subculture is something that has existed in the past, but it's certainly something that's growing. And that's because when you know about something, you're more likely to create an interest with it if you have a particular issue or fracture within your mindset. And when you see something and you feel that there maybe is a potential to belong there, understandably, because of the web and the fact that you're reading about it and hearing about it, that makes you more likely to go on a route that you would never have done had you not known that these things existed. So that nullo is short for genital nullification, and that means that the men were going ahead and having their penis and testicles removed. And as I said, it is a growing community, which is very disturbing. And From my point of view, my perspective as somebody who's worked in psychological therapies for a long time, it's to do with trauma on the whole. I would say childhood trauma, particularly when it's linked with sexual issues, is a very problematic mix for a lot of people. And if you imagine eradicating what was once sexual, then to some degree, if your trauma lies there, you feel that you are eradicating physically the trauma, and therefore you can emotionally come to terms with eradicating that trauma too in your mind. So this is why it's really interesting area to look at, because nullos are growing, and it says something really problematic about our society, that we're not helping people heal, and people are looking for these extreme routes to put their trauma into, to actually relieve themselves essentially by literally removing what represents it. Now, Marius Gustavson, he basically got this business together and then got a group of people involved in that business. He recruited like-minded individuals, all about assisting him in this really large scale, with respect, an incredibly dangerous activity, because you are literally putting your life on the line. Having your penis removed is going to potentially kill you. We have cases where individuals have literally had their penis removed by somebody who's angry with them in the UK, and they have died, they've bled out. It happens. So this is certainly something that occur. Of course, what Gustavson is saying is that's not going to happen, because he just uses the NHS. He calls them and they come and basically clean up literally his mess. Now, the other people who were involved in the modification cult in a big way was Peter Waters. He was 67. He was actually a retired member of the Royal Society of Chemists. He was from Purley, Surrey, so that is terrifying. He was involved in 9 procedures. Then there's David Carruthers, he was 61. He was a former surgical assistant. You can understand why he would want to be recruited by Gustavson, because anybody with surgical knowledge is going to be helpful. And his husband, as in David Carruthers' husband, Ashley Williams, who was 32, he came from Newport, Gwent, and they both removed a testicle from Janus Atkin. And Janus Atkin, he's 38 at the time of his involvement. He was actually studying veterinary science. He got involved in 8 procedures. Then there's Stefan Schaff. He was a 61-year-old German. He didn't have an address that was fixed at the time. He removed 1 testicle from a man in Gustafson's flat. Then there was Ion Secure. He's 30. He's a Romanian living in Gretna, Scotland. Very well known for marriages. Gretna Green, pop there, get yourself married. Much more actually aligned with marriage than, I don't know, removing somebody's penis. But anyway, this guy, he lived in Scotland and he was working in a hotel. He was involved in 2 procedures. So all of these guys together are essentially the kingpin and then the henchmen of this website. And like I said, the website wasn't hidden. It's completely out in the open. It was accessible to anyone, including your kids. How horrendous is that? That you have these individuals who are intent on grooming others to engage in these kind of horrific acts, and essentially it is just open for anybody to see. Now, the guys who carried out these operations did it in places like London flats and hotel rooms, and apparently those, for the most part, who went were willing volunteers, but some of these, in inverted commas, quote, willing volunteers, they were 16, come on. You don't have a clue what you're doing at 16. Honestly, I had a terrible perm. I wore really questionable clothes. I genuinely thought that everybody in the whole world should be vegan and there should be no excuses. And I was quite aggressive in my belief system. Probably turned more people to meat than I actually did to veganism. Because at 16, you're a different person to who you are at 30, and you're a different person to who you'll be at 60. You are on a process, and therefore at 16, your decisions are not based in reality. You haven't had the conscious existence. Making big decisions over your life at 16 often has some pretty terrible outcomes. It's as simple as that. That's why in the UK, you can't get a tattoo until you're 18. It's because people get that at 16, you're still developing. Your brain's still developing all the way up until 25. In fact, there should be some argument that we shouldn't be able to do anything until we're 25, let alone 16. And he is going ahead and grooming these individuals to go and do things that they cannot change. Now, over time, one of the things that you can tell about this particular site is it's starting to make money, because the videos themselves of the body modification procedures, they're getting produced to a much more professional standard. So he's investing in the right cameras, etc. And This is something that I cannot believe I'm going to say, because it sounds like a scene from The Purge or a movie that you expect to see in a horror genre. Because Gustavson, I kid you not, would hold auctions to sell body parts. It actually happened. He actually had auctions for body parts. Men would be sent a penis along with the video of it being cut off. Now, I don't know about you. I'm bored occasionally. Sometimes I go on Google and I look for things that interest me. I'll sometimes connect with websites and think to myself, oh, I'm going to treat myself. I'm going to buy that nice cushion. At no point in my experience, or in the experience of anybody I'm close to, have I ever come across somebody thinking, do you know what I really need? If I'm thinking about what I really want, looking at that bucket list, what I really want is a man's penis. And I'd really like to have the video of that penis being cut off. I'm just going to go and Google auctions for penis. Oh, here I am. I've got a site and anybody can enter it. I'll just get my credit card and subscribe. That's what happens. If you're not doing that on a Tuesday, I don't know what you're doing. But this is what happened. They were literally sent penises with the video of that penis being cut off. And there were literal body parts displayed with a buy it now option. With a buy it now option, like off eBay. You can go for a bit of an auction, or you can just go the whole hog and buy it and know that you're going to get that item, in this case, that penis, sent through your letterbox. He actually sold 4 penises online for £700. And one of the things that really surprises me is actually that price. I know this is horrific. I know it's malevolent. I know it's dark in nature. But I also think, wow, somebody is literally altering their life forever. And it's not even worth more than what I've just said. You're thinking, would somebody do this for tens of thousands of pounds, maybe hundreds of thousands of pounds? Well, I suppose there's a potential because money does talk and there's always a price. But most men, you could say, I'll give you £1 billion and it would still be a no, because it's basically a part of who they are and defines them partly as a man. And it's important for sexual contact and for intimacy. And yet this guy sells 4 penises online for £700. Somebody's life is changed, transformed, and certainly not for the better because of those operations. And essentially that's how cheap they were sold for. And that's why I struggle as a psychological practitioner, because I can see that this is not about the body part. This is about what the body part represents. And like I said, that's something that can be handled in a very different way when it comes down to a trauma therapy situation. And these kind of issues can hopefully get resolved, but that's not happening because people like this are out there taking advantage of these individuals who are struggling. Because no one's going there thinking, I'm going to have my penis cut off because I want to earn some cash. You go in there because you're like, there's something that I feel towards this part of my body and I don't like it. And somebody's offering me the option to get rid of it and I'm going to go ahead and do that. It's preying on the psychological disturbance and fractures in the human being who's struggling. Now, as well as the police obviously investigating Gustavson for what I've talked about so far, when they do arrest him, they find out that he has some very, very problematic material on his actual phone and on his technical equipment. He had indecent images of children. He also had bestiality porn. So this guy is the lowest of the low. Gustavson is a child sexual predator, as well as an individual with some very odd paraphilias when it comes down to sexual connection and behaviour. And in one text message that they uncovered, he claimed to have castrated and had sex with an 8-year-old child. Now, again, people can say this is fantasy, he's just texting, this is just an issue with him fantasizing about certain things. There's no evidence to suggest that he's actually physically abused a child. I disagree massively. If you're looking at child pornography, you are a child abuser, you are a molester. People will say, well, it's a non-contact crime. And actually the courts disgust me because the courts in the UK are often letting these absolute not rights walk from court with orders of community level where they're not actually going into prison because, hey, they're just images. The only reason those images exist is because those kind of lunatics, in my opinion, those kind of absolute grotesque excuses for human beings are watching that material. So they are contact crime based. They've not physically touched them with their hands, but they have made it so that those images are required. They are perpetrators of child molestation and should be treated accordingly. There's no, oh, I'm just a little bit into child sexual exploitation. It doesn't work that way. You are a child sexual exploiter. You are a child molester, and you should be treated with the most harsh sentences. I don't think you're safe to be walking the streets, end of. So I don't think this man is somebody who is just an individual who struggles with areas of his body. I think this is a man who is a A1, A-grade predator of the highest level. Now, all of the procedures that happened where this man is concerned and where these guys who worked with him are concerned, they were carried out by medically unqualified people for the most part. They weren't carried out in sterile environments. Now, in some cases, the equipment that was used was medical, but often it was just normal household equipment. Literally, things that you and I would have in our kitchen drawer. Many of the operations were carried out on Gustavson's bed, and the men were strapped down by the wrists and ankles, which immediately means that they can't remove themselves from that situation. They are literally restrained. Many of the videos that were created were also very overtly sexual, or they had clear sexual overtones. Lots of the people who were there were in great distress. Victims were in absolute clear pain. In one video, a man is literally heard saying on the film he doesn't want to die. So this does not work out well for these individuals. They may have had a fantasy about what's going to occur, but the reality is a whole different ballgame, and understandably, some of those operations, those home surgeries, resulted in the need for emergency medical treatment. Again, stealing from the NHS, who's already massively underfunded in the UK. The last thing that the NHS need is for people who don't need to have treatment to create a need for treatment by doing these things. Many of the reasons that led to intervention by the NHS was due to severe blood loss. And during the trial, Gustavson actually can be heard on several 999 calls really calmly lying to the operator about how the victims have injured themselves. Because that happens, doesn't it? I mean, it's such a regular occurrence for the NHS that men rip off their penises by mistake. If I'm not hearing on a week-to-week basis about some poor fellow having an accident in the garden that removes his testicles and his penis, I don't know that it's an ordinary week at all. It just is so commonplace. I'm sure everybody here can relate to that. I'm sure we all know somebody who no longer has a penis or genitals of any type because, you know, they had an accident with a lawnmower or a kitchen knife. Happens all the time. Life's dangerous, isn't it, chaps? But this is basically what he does. Now, in November 2020, things change. A victim of his surgery comes forward and actually goes and says to the police, this happened to me. So this is obviously somebody who's gone ahead, has allowed this to take place to some degree. And I use the word allowed in inverted commas because you cannot consent to this kind of thing. It's against the law in the UK. But this person has obviously dealt with the ramifications, dealt with the trauma that it's actually provoked, and is thinking to themselves, this should not be happening. This guy needs to be stopped. And he goes and speaks to the police very, very bravely, because I think there will be a lot of shame associated with what he did. I think he'll be convinced that he's deserved what's happened, and to actually go as a victim who maybe has all of that confusion psychologically and feels responsible to some degree with what's occurred, to still go and speak to the police and say, listen, I want to protect other people. You know, the damage has been done to them, but they want to protect other people. That speaks volumes about their nature. And it also tells you the most important thing, which is what you think is a fixation and fantasy, and you then place it into reality and actuality. They can be absolutely distinct. So you can have this fantasy and imagine how great it's going to be when it occurs. And then it can occur and you feel totally different than what you initially anticipated. And that demonstrates why these big decisions over body parts can lead not to positive outcomes in the long term, can lead to deeply problematic outcomes. In this case, clearly that's provoked this person going and speaking to the police. So he speaks to Devon and Cornwall police about the procedures that he had carried out on him. He told police that those procedures happened when he was high on drugs, and that when Gustavson first cut him with a scalpel at his flat in Haringey, North London, he had actually been strapped to a bed. He'd then been electrocuted, and in further experiences with Gustavson, he'd had his testicles clamped. He'd even been branded with a red hot iron, imprinting EM on his calf, which obviously stands for Eunuch Maker. And what does that say again about Gustavson? It's all about territory. It's all about ownership. He's basically branding that person and saying, this person is my work. He's just so loudly arrogant about his actions. This is not somebody who's ashamed. This is not somebody who's got any remorse for what he's doing. He loves it. So much so, he wants to brand people with his name, the Eunuch Maker. Now, that victim said that when he looks back at the actions that he involved himself with and the permission to some degree he gave Gustavson to horrifically affect his life, came from feeling that he was groomed, that he felt mesmerized was the statement by him, but that he'd now realized he was an absolute lunatic. And he actually handed over to the police a USB stick that contained 5,000 WhatsApp messages, 100 images, and also the details of a number of victims. Now, he was the only victim out of all the people they spoke to who assisted the police in their inquiries. And that is going to be for a range of reasons. First of all, it's going to be because of loyalty. Remember, a lot of these individuals genuinely think that they're willing participants in this situation, so they don't feel that a crime has been committed. They're like, we went of our own volition, we had these things done. Some of them may even feel that their life has improved a little bit because of what they had done. I'll talk about that separately in a moment. And some would be ashamed and be like, I don't want to be in court and be asked to testify against this individual. I don't want everyone knowing I've had my penis cut off, because it's a very secretive experience doing this kind of thing. You want to be accepted in your community, but you don't necessarily want to be excluded by the other community around you, which is the typical population, who will find it absolutely weird. So now the police have all of this information. Clearly, Gustavson is bang to rights, or dead to rights, as they would say in America. And the investigation into the Eunuch Maker ended up being, I kid you not, guys, 4 times the size of a typical murder investigation. Massive, massive investigation. A huge amount of money spent bringing these individuals down. The police also had to go through some pretty traumatic detail. So they had to view thousands of images. They had to watch 400 hours of disturbing footage. And that footage was actually found on hard drives in Gustavson's flat. Now, they also found in that same flat, what can we say? A variety of tools, a variety of implements that could be used in such home surgeries, but also some torturous equipment too. So these included clamps, forceps, electrodes, catheters, scalpels. I know, if you haven't got a drawer at home with all of these items, I don't know where you live. I mean, it's routine for me. If I haven't got a full medical grade table in my lounge, if I haven't got a whole operating slab in my spare room, if I haven't got a drawer that literally has all medical equipment that can be used in operations, and in another drawer, just a whole amount of BDSM and extreme sadistic quality items, I don't know where I'm living. I mean, I would say that whenever you're going into a new build these days, that's one of the things that you're going to demand, isn't it? Where is the medical area in the garage? Well, okay, I'll take it. I'll take it. But yes, this is what's going on. So the police are clearly aware that some really awful things have been happening in his home. And the clamps that they found that were used in the castration videos, they're ones that are commonly used to castrate livestock. So you went in there and basically were treated the same way that a bull would be treated. Also, when they looked at the thousands of WhatsApp messages, it showed that Gustavson was just such a groomer, a real arch manipulator of the victims. Yes, they consented to the procedures, but they were all very vulnerable. So the police end up travelling across the UK, searching for the victims, searching for the witnesses, and the Met Police liaised with the UK and overseas police as well to find the men who were responsible. They searched for Peter Waters and they found his address. And when they actually searched that address, they found a scrotum and 2 penile shafts inside a tub of butter labelled "Do not defrost." That's a little bit harrowing, isn't it? It's not what you expect to find in a regular freezer, is it? Butter tub labelled "Do not defrost." Imagine going house sitting for somebody like that. You know, people do it, don't they? I have a house sitter for my dogs when I'm away and for my cats when I'm away. He's brilliant. But, you know, I'm sure at times he thinks, what's in the freezer? Is there anything that I can cook and add to whatever food I'm doing? She might have left some bits and bobs, which I tend to do. I don't know. If you saw a little tub that said do not defrost, you might be like, ooh, do not defrost. It's a butter tub, but it says do not defrost. Maybe there's some delicious ice cream. it's a bit light. It's a bit on the light side. I'll just have a look at open it. Oh, is that a shriveled up penis? Is that a penis shaft? Oh no, it's two. It's two penis shafts. Ugh, this is horrific. I can't even believe that the police had to do this, search this stuff, because those poor male police officers must have been crossing their legs the whole time. In the end, 10 people were charged with taking part in extreme body modification procedures in London, Scotland and Wales. All the charges related to 13 victims. And as I said, the youngest of those victims was 16 years of age. And all of those victims are apparently now being safeguarded because, understandably, crimes have been committed towards them. They will be treated, rightly so, as victims, not perpetrators of their own scenario, because that's what they are. They are victims. They are individuals who have been dealt a horrible blow because of their psychological situation, stress, and potential previous trauma. They've ended up in this situation where somebody has totally taken advantage of them, and now they have lifelong altering experiences to their bodies. Now, the men involved in Eunuch Maker, they all claimed that they identified as eunuchs and they had to do the operations on each other because they were basically not available on the NHS, which is true. Obviously, the NHS does do operations involving gender dysphoria. For those of you who don't know what gender dysphoria is, it means that you're an individual who is born as a biological male or female, but as you progress through your years, you find that you get a better level of peace by presenting as the opposite gender. And when we talk about the surgeries that occur on the NHS, obviously for females that can mean a double mastectomy. For the males, it can be a removal of penis and a kind of changing to make it look like a female genitals, but understandably it doesn't operate that way. And these are decisions that are taken by people who often have got a lot of psychological distress, but when it comes down to the presentation of being somebody who feels more comfortable with the opposite gender and presenting that way, that can, when it comes down to dysphoria, reduce those symptoms, which are very upsetting for people who genuinely feel that they don't feel comfortable in their own body. I know there's lots of debate. I'm not going to get involved in the political scenarios or discussions about that. What I do know is over the years, I have rarely treated dysphoria, very rarely in very young children. And I have equally seen that in very extreme cases, people can get a sense of better well-being when they feel that the world reacts to them and relates to them, presenting as the gender that they weren't born as. But I know there's a huge amount of debate. But what I would say is gender dysphoria is something that I have experienced, and it is very real for the individuals going through it. And sometimes it can be permanent, and sometimes it can indeed be transitory, so transient in nature. But what we're talking about here is something different. We're not talking about dysphoria, which is why you can't just go to the NHS and say, I want my leg removed, because this is not seen in the same context as dysphoria at all. But again, some people are going to debate that, and I'll tell you why shortly. So in January 2024, 3 men were actually sentenced. They admitted, by the way, during this actual court case that they did indeed cause GBH to Gustavson. So Damien Burns, he was a person who removed Gustavson's penis and testicles with a kitchen knife. I kid you not, a kitchen knife. Go and have a look at your kitchen, look at those knives and think, doesn't seem like the thing you'd want to remove a penis with. That was in February 2017. He said he did that. Extremely graphic video footage of that actual event was shown to the court. The video showed Gustavson gagged and strapped to the bed by Burns. A gag was placed around Gustavson's head and mouth, and Burns leans between his legs. He holds this red kitchen knife, and then he severs Gustavson's penis. Once Gustavson is ungagged, he tells Burns to put that penis on his belly, the now severed penis on his belly, and Burns actually holds the severed penis towards Gustavson's face, and Gustavson licks it and declares that it is, quote, awesome. Absolutely bizarre. Now, following his arrest in 2022, he did admit that he'd done this. He said he was in financial difficulty and he'd basically performed the act on Gustavson because he needed money, and that he felt absolutely disgusted with himself afterwards. He'd apparently thrown up on the way home, which is very different to the tale that was told earlier on when he said that it was one that he had on his bucket list that he didn't expect to complete. But nonetheless, he's changed his story now. Apparently he was appalled by what he did and he just did it for the money. Come on. I don't buy that for a second. It was 500 quid. Are you kidding me? It was 500 quid. I needed the money. What would it cost to kill somebody? Because on that rate, probably for 2 grand, he'd have murdered somebody according to his desire for money. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But apparently he's now appalled and ashamed by what he'd done. But he did go back and do a few more things and earn some more money. So that doesn't really make any sense at all. He was treated very seriously. He was given 5 years in prison for causing GBH with intent. So stern sentence with respect. Gustavson's boyfriend, Jacob Crummy Appleby, who was 23 at the time that he'd been charged and brought to court, he, as we know, froze Gustavson's leg in dry ice, and that led to its amputation. He was jailed for 3 years and 8 months. Then we had Nathan Arnold, who was 48. He removed part of Gustavson's nipple. He also pled guilty to theft for stealing anaesthetic between 2016 and 2022. That was from the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital. Obviously, he was a nurse, so he had access to these things. He also pled guilty to possession of extreme pornography. In court, sorry, I'm starting to smile, but sometimes these descriptions really get me. In court, he was described as a compassionate, gentle, mild-mannered, and respectful nurse who had committed the offences while experiencing hypomania as part of his bipolar disorder. So he got a 2-year suspended sentence. Now, I am going to just throw it in there, guys, that when it comes down to this particular nurse being described that way, I'm not buying it. We can all mask, can't we? BTK was somebody whose colleagues thought was a really nice guy, the kind of guy that you'd like to walk you down a dark alley. He's also a serial killer. Just because somebody comes across as gentle, mild-mannered and respectful doesn't necessarily mean that they really are. You know, with respect, he had extreme pornography. So we all know what we're talking about there when we're talking about extreme pornography. You know, it's just bordering on the illegal level, essentially. And he stole from a hospital, and he did actually involve himself in surgery when it came down to removing the nipple. And we don't know whether he did more than those things. But yeah, he just gets a 2-year suspended sentence because apparently it's all to do with his hypomania. So if you think about bipolar disorder, and obviously there's type 1 and type 2 bipolar disorder, but let's talk about the more serious one as far as notable symptoms are concerned, which is bipolar type 1. When you look at mania and hypomania, mania can go on for quite a long time, whereas hypomania tends to be quite quick. You go through a period of quite a quick period of mania. So hypomania can be very, very big for a shorter amount of time. And essentially you can be somebody who takes more risks. That's probably the best way of describing it, to take more risks. It can make you a bit more manic and euphoric and make you employ poor decision making. And clearly the defence for this guy is it was just poor decisions. Now, Gustavson, he was throughout the court case described as a willing victim to these offences. So he's basically saying, yeah, I had all of this done, but these guys aren't actually guilty of anything. I wanted it. I enjoyed it. It made me feel better. I consented to all of these actions and I'm sticking to that. The thing about Gustavson, I will be really clear about, is he does not regret any of what happened. Yeah, he'll regret being caught and put in prison, but he has no remorse whatsoever for his actions. Now, Gustavson also pled guilty because he had to. He's on video. You can't really get away with it when you literally are seen in videos doing what you're doing, and you're also seen to be making money and profiting from this situation. So he said, yeah, I am guilty of the charges against me, and those included conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm, 5 counts of grievous bodily harm with intent, 1 count of making and 1 count of distributing indecent images of a child, and also possession of criminal property, contrary to section 329.1 of the Proceedings of Crime Act 2002. As he pled guilty, of course, he didn't actually need to give evidence at the trial. Now, there was a 3-day sentencing hearing for Gustavson, and also for his 6 accomplices, because there was so much material that needed to go through to ensure that the right decision was made regarding the sentencing. The court heard how Gustavson ran a very lucrative business, how he shared images of dangerous, unnecessary and life-changing surgeries. Now, the procedures included castrations, the use of clamps to crush testicles, penis removals, the freezing of limbs, and the administering shocks to a 16-year-old boy, which were all streamed on Gustavson's website. And of course, the victim, who came forward very bravely, he had his victim statement read out in court. In that victim statement, he described Gustavson as a lunatic who had put together a slick professional website. And the court heard how on one occasion, Gustavson appeared to eat human testicles. I did say that. Yes, he appeared to eat human testicles, and there was literally clear evidence of cannibalism. On one occasion, Gustavson cooked what appeared to be human testicles, which were then plated to be eaten, was the quote from court. Images on Gustavson's phone from the 22nd of June 2018 show the raw ingredients that helped to be developed into an artfully arranged salad platter. So literally, testicles on a salad platter. They also heard that Gustavson was obsessed with keeping trophies. They were body parts, including testicles, which were kept in takeaway tubs in his freezer. Gustavson's own penis didn't get the same treatment. Didn't keep them in a takeaway tub in the freezer. No, that one was found in a drawer. Just a drawer in his home. Who hasn't got a drawer like that? You know, you open a drawer, it's full of trinkets. It's got wires that you don't even know belong to particular things that you probably don't even have in your home anymore. They have leads for phones that you had 15 years ago. We've all got one of those. And you know, you've got the odd body part just hanging about in the drawer as well. Oh, is that a finger? Oh, is that a testicle? Oh, is that somebody's nose? You know, if you don't have those, you go in your freezer, you're like, what shall I eat tonight? I don't know. I'm trying to think about what I might fancy. Ooh, I do think I've got some testicles in tubs that will look lovely on a salad platter. I mean, said no rational human being ever. Now, Gustavson claimed in court as part of his defence that he had body integrity dysphoria. Now, some of you may have heard of body integrity dysphoria. Others of you may have heard of BIID, body integrity identity disorder. Now, what this is, although some practitioners don't believe it exists, I do believe it exists because I've worked with somebody who wanted to go blind. I've also worked with somebody who wanted their arm cut off. So I absolutely know the distress of BIID, and I know that it's real. And what this is characterised as is somebody who has this real intent and persistent desire to become physically disabled in a significant way. So what we know about this particular disorder is that the person who is struggling, and often it involves legs, it's significant to legs. So that, for the most part, is what people struggle with. I don't know why, but when we look statistically at the research, we look mostly at legs and also the left leg, because people drive in the UK with the right leg. It will be significant in other countries to be the opposite, because they don't want to disable themselves to a point where it's deeply problematic in their future. And driving is something that, of course, is going to be more easy with your right leg, particularly with automatic vehicles. So the particular leg that they dislike, or maybe it's their eyesight they dislike, maybe it's their hands that they dislike, but there is something about that area of their body that doesn't map correctly for them. They don't feel like it belongs to them. They feel, in fact, that it is something that should not be there. And some of this is psychological. There is some evidence on a research level that there is also neurological issues. So the brain is not mapping the body appropriately, and it is kind of missing this area. So it doesn't feel that that area is meant to be present. And those who are researched in this very secretive area with BIID, they can literally tell you where that leg should be amputated. It's very specific. So there'll be an area that they'll say it has to be cut here, because it feels like that particular area is where the brain is not picking up that limb, or the brain is not picking up that they should be able to see. And so it's very significant on a trauma scale for that individual. And it's very hard when we all have issues with our body. Of course we do. All of us might want to be slimmer, or might want to be bigger, might want to be taller, might want to be shorter. We all can have a level of discomfort with our body, sure. But what we're talking about here is where there is an interplay of the psychology and the neurology, and together we get this mismatch when it comes down to the experience of inhabiting that form. And very, very rarely, and I mean super rarely, you will have psychiatrists agreeing that that person can have a limb removed, which seems completely counterproductive to humanity when you think we want people to accept themselves fully. But if that person is going to end up on a train track having their leg injured so that they can have that removed, or freezing their limb, which we see play out, understandably, because that is a risk to life, you will have certain very rare psychiatrists say, okay, this is going to be the only way this person can continue. And I will also note that when that happens, the person tends to invariably feel happier. And the problem that I see there is that what should happen is, prior to that, that individual should experience trauma therapy, because I have a big belief that, forget about the mapping situation, I think we can fixate and our brain can become completely convinced that something is wrong about who we are, much as I'm sure lots of you have experienced eating disorders that I did when I was a teenager. I genuinely thought that being 4 stone 5 was probably a good aim. Clearly, it was terrible and it would have killed me. And fortunately, I didn't get to that point. But the point was, my brain fully convinced itself that being super, super, super ill and thin was a far better idea than being healthy and fit. So our brain can become convinced that we should be different to who we are. And when you work in trauma therapy, often you can help that person to reintegrate that sense that that limb or the eyesight belongs to them and is something that they should really value. Because if you imagine it like this, when we are traumatized, particularly as children, we have to figure out coping strategies. We have to figure out the techniques that are going to make us feel like we can live on a day-to-day level. Now, some of us early on will recognize that we have this issue and will seek help. But for the most part, a lot of us don't realize why these things are happening. We don't realize it's because we were traumatized as a child. So we figure a coping strategy. So imagine thinking to yourself, all my problems would be better if I got this arm removed. I've basically put all of the trauma into that physical arena. Same as if I did it with my leg or my eyesight. I've basically taken all of my pain and I've said, you are my problem. And I've sent it all to that area. And that area feels like it shouldn't be within my psyche. It shouldn't be within my body because it is so deeply problematic. So if I cut it off, I literally remove all of that trauma from my life because I've placed it all there and it's physically become this representation of all my pain. And then I get rid of it and it gives me a sense of peace because I genuinely feel like I have removed that agony. And like I said, certainly the research evidence is that for some people, they do feel significantly better. But we can get there by reintegrating that particular limb or the eyesight by helping you see that this is trauma-based, you don't deserve it, that limb or your eyesight, etc., has not done anything wrong. And actually, it's just become something that represents that part of your pain that you don't know how to deal with, and we help you deal with it. So this is their defense, basically. He's got BIID. And certainly, I would say that the fact that he has his leg removed and his penis removed, that certainly suggests to me that he probably does. He said that when he had the procedures, they gave him a sense of empowerment, they gave him a sense of greater acceptance of himself, he felt very content with his own body. And his defense argued that Gustavson only wanted to put a smile on people's faces by providing a service to those suffering like him from BID or BIID. Now, it's an odd thing for the defence to say, it really is. The idea that Gustavson sees himself as this Robin Hood of body modification and of psychological distress and bringing peace to those around him, it's like, you know what, but why did you stream all of that? Why did you make loads of money from it? The minute that you're making cash from people's distress, you're a malevolent force. It's as simple as that. But this is what the defence say. They even said that Gustavson wanted to go back to Norway because he believed that in Norway, they would accept his views. Because, of course, Norway's going to be like, that's totally all right. You should definitely, hey, you send him back here. We're totally okay. We've actually got a line of people who would really be happy with Gustavson's home surgery. You know, you just send him back. We're really liberal over here. Absolute BS. There is no way that the Norwegian police would be like, that's fine. You just keep streaming your amputations. We'll come along and watch. but this is the defence. Of course, as I've said, Gustavson does not express any remorse for the crimes. He doesn't have any concern for the lifelong physical and psychological harm that was done to his victims. He thinks what he did was right. Now, the prosecution, they told the court, we suggest the diagnosis, if it exists, may explain why it is Mr. Gustavson acted as he did to have his own body maimed and mutilated, but this does not explain why he made a lucrative business out of mutilating others. And that's absolutely correct. I mean, we all agree with what the prosecution are saying there. Sure, deal with your own pain, your own trauma, act in a way that's distressing for us to hear about, but that for you, as far as you're concerned, brings you a level of peace in your body. We understand that we would not send him to prison for freezing his leg, even if we disagree with why he did it, if he has this psychological distress, because ultimately he's harmed only himself. But that's not what's played out here. He's gone ahead and he's basically made a fortune from it. Now, in the trial, it was accepted that the victims did consent to the procedures, but as I said earlier, consent is not a defence to what took place. They said, whilst the victims in this case all seemingly consented to surgeries and amputations, the victim, who bravely reported his assault to the police, expressed serious regret regarding his procedure and the lasting impact it had upon him. This clearly emphasises why such practices are unlawful. Like I said, that's the ruling of Brown, because you can't go around harming people just because they say they want it. Some people are absolutely broken psychologically and they're looking for anything to remedy their pain. We can't have individuals like this saying they've got the answer to it when it causes such long-term damage. And the judge actually talked about in his summing up that what happened was little short of human butchery, and it was. That's what we're talking about. We are talking about the butchering of human beings who obviously were dealing with some pretty traumatic experiences in the past that had led them to this moment where they thought that this was the way forward. And it's terrifying that this website was open for everybody and anybody to see, because it just made people believe that this was legitimate. It wasn't on the dark web, as I said. The fact that it was open and available on Google, the fact there was a subscription model and no one was doing anything about it, no one was looking in that direction, that genuinely means that it made it look legitimate. And that would have enticed people in and meant that they were subscribing and even electing for these operations to try to manage some of their psychological distress. Now, when the judge decided on the sentence, he said, Gustavson, you are very much the mastermind behind this grisly and gruesome enterprise. The business you set up was one that was both busy and lucrative. As with all the others involved, you have no medical qualifications. He went on to say the footage uploaded was extremely explicit and made available to paying subscribers, no doubt, so they could watch it for their sexual gratification. Like-minded individuals were recruited by you, Gustavson, to assist in what became a large-scale, dangerous and extremely disturbing enterprise. The judge was entirely satisfied that the motivation was a mix of sexual gratification as well as financial rewards. So, with that in mind, on the 9th of May 2024, 46-year-old Gustavson was given a life sentence and jailed for a minimum of 22 years. That's a big sentence, guys, it really is. 6 men who all admitted conspiracy to commit GBH with intent were sentenced alongside him. Peter Waits was jailed for 12 years with his involvement in 9 procedures. Then David Carruthers was jailed for 11 years for his engagement. Ashley Williams, he was the person who admitted to performing castrations. He got 4 years and 6 months. Yanis Atkin, he admitted conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm and he was jailed for 12 years. Stefan Schaff, he was jailed for 4 years and 6 months. And Ion Sikur, he was jailed for 5 years and 8 months in total. So they got some very hefty sentences, rightfully so, but also those sentences reflect a message to the general public, which is you cannot do this. You cannot make money from people's psychological trauma and pain. It's a message out there to these pay-per-view sites that may think they're going to get away with it, that the authorities are looking in and the authorities are going to treat you very seriously with the full weight of the law where these are concerned. Now, a lot of people are understandably going to have conflict regarding this particular case, because if these individuals are suffering with BID, then arguably, psychologically, they're in a very painful position and they're doing what they can to survive. But the reason that they received such stern, strong sentences is because if it had just been them personally doing it to themselves, that is terrible and it is sad, and my gosh, we should be able to help these individuals come to a place where they can accept themselves fully. But with that in mind, the very fact that they then took that issue and they, understandably, if they were dealing with it themselves, recognized the psychological distress and ultimately then brought others in and groomed others to make money from them. They weren't doing this in an altruistic way. They weren't thinking this person struggles as I have struggled and therefore I'm going to help them affect a change that's going to make a difference to their lives. They were using them as cash cows. And they were literally doing some of the most abusive and hostile things that create lifelong change for those individuals, which will be, for some of them, regrettable. That's why they got the sentences that they deserve. Like I said, this case has been mind-blowing, and the seriousness regarding the sentencing of Gustavson highlights just what a manipulative, coercive, and dangerous human being that he was and is. He's going to spend a long time behind bars. He's got a stronger sentence than many received for murder. That demonstrates the level that that judge believes this man operated at and the malevolence involved in his nature. Can you ever rehabilitate this kind of person? Add to that the fact that he is a molester of children. Add to that he's engaged in bestiality content. We really have a human being who is so distorted sexually that I think he will be a danger to anybody in the future should he get to walk our streets again, and will need to be kept a very, very, very stern eye on when he finally does walk our streets once again. And I think it's arrogant and ridiculous for him to suggest that Norway would treat him differently to the UK. What he did was wrong. And now he can relent and indeed repent at leisure as the watchful eye of His Majesty's Prison Service watch over him. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below as ever, and I will see you again next time. Look after yourself, guys.